the tour. "This way, everybody! This way!" Ed Regis said. By his side, a woman was passing out pith helmets with Jurassic Park label on the headband and little blue dinosaur logo. A line of Toyota Land Cruisers came out of the underground garage beneath the visitor center. Each car pulled up, driverless and silent. Two black men in safari uniforms were opening the doors for passengers. 2 to 4 passengers to a car, please. 2 to 4 passengers to a car, a recorded voice was saying. Children under 10 must be accompanied by an adult. 2 to 4 passengers to a car, please. Tim watched as Grant, Sattler, and Malcolm got into the first Land Cruiser with the lawyer Gennaro. Tim looked over at Lex, who was standing pounding her fist into her glove. Tim pointed to the first car and said, "Can I go with them?" "I'm afraid they have things to discuss," Ed Regis said. "Technical things." "I'm interested in technical things," Tim said. "I'd rather go with them." "Well, you'd be able to hear what they're saying," Regis said. "We have a radio open between the cars." The second car came. Tim and Lex got in, and Ed Regis followed. "These are electric cars," Regis said, "guided by a cable in the roadway." Tim was glad he was sitting in the front seat because mounted on the dashboard were 2 computer screens and a box that looked to him like a CD-ROM that was a laserdisc played controlled by a computer. There was also a portable walkie-talkie and some kind of radio transmitter. There were 2 antennas on the roof, and some odd goggles in the map pocket. The black man shut the doors of the Land Cruiser. The car started off with an electric hum. Up ahead, the 3 scientists and Gennaro were talking and pointing. Clearly excited, Ed Regis said, "Let's hear what they are saying." An intercom clicked. "I don't know what the hell you think you're doing here," Gennaro said over the intercom. He sounded very angry. "I know quite well why I'm here." "You're here to advise me, not play goddamn mind games. I got 5% of this company and a responsibility to make sure that Hammond has done his job responsibly. Now you goddamn come here!" Ed Regis pressed the intercom button and said, "In keeping with the non-polluting policies of Jurassic Park, these lightweight electric Land Cruisers have been specially built for us by Toyota in Osaka. Eventually, we hope to drive among the animals, just as they do in African game parks. But for now, sit back and enjoy the self-guided tour." He paused. "And, by the way, we can hear you back there." "Oh, Christ," Gennaro said. "I have to be able to speak freely. I didn't ask for these damn kids to come." Ed Regis smiled blandly and pushed a button. "We'll just begin the show, shall we?" They heard a fanfare of trumpets, and the interior screens flashed. "Welcome to Jurassic Park," a sonorous voice said. "Welcome to Jurassic Park. You are now entering the lost world of prehistoric past, a world of mighty creatures long gone from the face of the earth, which you are privileged to see for the first time." "That's Richard Kiley," Ed Regis said. "We spared no expense." The Land Cruiser passed through a grove of low, stumpy palm trees. Richard Kiley was saying, "Notice, first of all, the remarkable plant life that surrounds you. Those trees to your left and right are called cycads, the prehistoric predecessors to palm trees. Cycads were a favorite food of the dinosaurs. You can also see the Benedictalians and ginkgos. The world of the dinosaur included more modern plants, such as pine and fir trees and swamp cypresses. You will see these as well." The Land Cruiser moved slowly among the foliage. Tim noticed the fences and retaining walls were screened by greenery to heighten the illusion of moving through a real jungle. "We imagine the world of the dinosaurs," said Richard Kiley's voice, "as a world of huge vegetarians eating their way through the giant swampy forests of the Jurassic and Cretaceous world, 100 million years ago. But most dinosaurs were not as large as people think. The smallest dinosaurs were no bigger than a house cat, and the average dinosaur was about as big as a pony. We are first going to visit one of these average-sized animals called Hypsilophodonts. If you look to your left, you may catch a glimpse of them now." They all looked to the left. The Land Cruiser stopped on a low rise, where a break in the foliage provided a view to the east. They could see a sloping forested area which opened to a field of yellow grass that was about 3 feet high. There were no dinosaurs. "Where are they?" Lex said. Tim looked at the dashboard. The transmitter lights blinked and the CD-ROM whirred. Obviously, the disc was being accessed by some automatic system. He guessed that the same motion sensors that tracked the animals also controlled the screens on the Land Cruiser. The screens now showed pictures of Hypsilophodonts and printed out data about them. The voice said, "Hypsilophodonts are the gazelles of the dinosaur world. Small, quick animals that once roamed everywhere in the world, from England to Central Asia to North America. We think these dinosaurs were successful because they had better jaws and teeth for chewing plants than their contemporaries did. In fact, the name Hypsilophodontid means high ridged tooth, which refers to the characteristic self-sharpening teeth of these animals. You can see them in the plains directly ahead, and also perhaps in the branches of the trees.
In the trees? Lex said. Dinosaurs in trees?
Tim was scanning with binoculars too.
To the right, he said. Halfway up, that big green trunk.
In the dappled shadows of the tree, a motionless, dark green animal about the size of a baboon stood on a branch. It looked like a lizard standing on its hind legs. It balanced itself with a long, drooping tail.
That's an Othnielia, Tim said.
The small animals you see are called Othnielia, the voice said, in honor of the 19th century dinosaur hunter, Othniel Marsh of Yale. Tim spotted 2 more animals on the higher branches of the same tree. They were all about the same size. None of them were moving.
Pretty boring, Link said. They're not doing anything.
The main herd of animals can be found in the grassy plain below you, said the voice. We can rouse them with a simple mating call. A loudspeaker by the fence gave a long nasal call like the honking of geese. From the field of grass directly to the left, 6 lizards' heads poked up, one after the other. The effect was comical, and Tim laughed. The heads disappeared. The loudspeaker gave the call again, and once again the heads poked up, in exactly the same way, one after another. The fixed repetition of the behavior was striking. Hypsilophodonts are not especially bright animals, the voice explained. They have roughly the intelligence of a domestic cow. The heads were dull green, with a mottling of dark browns and blacks that extended down the slender necks. Judging from the size of the heads, Tim guessed their bodies were 4 feet long and about as large as a deer. Some of the Hypsilophodonts were chewing, the jaws working. One reached up and scratched its head, with a 5-fingered hand. The gesture gave the creature of a pensive, thoughtful quality. If you see them scratching, that is because they have skin problems. The veterinary scientists here at Jurassic Park think it may be a fungus or an allergy, but they're not sure yet. After all, these are the first dinosaurs in history to ever be studied alive. The electric motor of the car started, and there was a grinding of gears. At the unexpected sound, the herd of Hypsilophodonts suddenly leapt into the air and bounded above the grass like kangaroos, showing their full bodies with massive hind limbs and long tails in the afternoon sunlight. In a few leaps, they were gone. Now that we have had a look at these fascinating herbivores, we will go on to some dinosaurs that are a little larger. Quite a bit larger, in fact. The land cruisers continued onward, moving south through Jurassic Park. Control. Gears are grinding, General said in the darkened control room. Have maintenance check the electric clutches on vehicles BB4 and BB5 while they come back.
Yes, Mr. Arnold,
replied the voice in the intercom.
Minor detail,
Hammond said, walking into the room. Looking out, he could see the 2 land cruisers moving south through the park. Muldoon stood in the corner, silently watching. Arnold pushed his chair back from the central console to the control panel. These are no minor details, Mr. Hammond, he said as he lit another cigarette. Nervous at most times, Arnold was especially edgy now. He was only too aware that this was the first time visitors had actually toured the park. In fact, Arnold's team didn't often go into the park. Harding, the vet, sometimes did. The animal handlers went to the individual feeding houses, but otherwise, they watched the park from the control room. And now, with visitors out there, he worried about 100 details. John Arnold was a systems engineer who had worked at the Polaris submarine missile of the late 1960s, until he had his first child and the prospect of making weapons became too distasteful. Meanwhile, Disney had started to create amusement park rides of great technological sophistication, and they employed a lot of aerospace people. Arnold helped build Disney World in Orlando, and had gone on to implement major parks at Magic Mountain in California, Old Country in Virginia, and Astroworld in Houston. His continuous employment at parks had eventually given him a somewhat skewed view of reality. Arnold contended only half-jokingly that the entire world was increasingly described by a metaphor of the theme park. Paris is a theme park, he once announced after a vacation, although it's too expensive and the park employees are unpleasant and sullen. For the past 2 years, Arnold's job had been to get Jurassic Park up and running. As an engineer, he was accustomed to long time schedules. He often referred to the September opening, by which he meant September of the following year, and as the September opening approached, he was unhappy with the progress that had been made. He knew from experience that it sometimes took years to work the bugs out of a single park ride, let alone the whole park running properly.
You're just a worrier, Hammond said.
I don't think so, Arnold said. You gotta realize that from an engineering standpoint, Jurassic Park is by far the most ambitious theme park in history. Visitors will never think about it, but I do. He ticked the points off his fingers. First, Jurassic Park has all the problems of any amusement park ride. Maintenance, queue control, transportation, food handling, living accommodations, trash disposal, security.
Second, we all have all the problems of a major zoo. Care of the animals, health and welfare, feeding and cleanliness, protection from insects, pests, allergies and illnesses, maintenance of barriers, and all the rest. And finally, we have the unprecedented problems of caring for a population of animals that no one has ever tried to maintain before.
Oh, it's not as bad as all that,
Hammond said. Yes, it is. You're just not here to see it, Arnold said. The Tyrannosaurs drink the lagoon water and sometimes get sick. We aren't sure why. The Triceratops females kill each other in fights for dominance, and we have to separate into smaller groups in 6. We don't know why. The Stegosaurs frequently get blisters on the tongues and diarrhea, for reasons no one yet understands, even though we've lost 2. Hypsilophodonts get skin rashes, and the Velociraptors...
Let's not start on the Velociraptors, Hammond said. I'm sick of hearing about the Velociraptors. How they're the most vicious creatures anyone has ever seen.
They are, Muldoon said with a low voice. They should all be destroyed.
You wanted to fit them with radio collars, Hammond said, and I agreed.
Yes, and they promptly chewed it off, but even if the raptors never get free, Arnold said, I think we have to accept that Jurassic Park is inherently hazardous.
Oh, balls, Hammond said. Whose side are you on anyway?
We now have 15 species of extinct animals, and most of them are dangerous, Arnold said. We've been forced to delay the Jungle River ride because of the Dilophosaurs, and the Triceratops Lodge in the aviary because the pterodactyls are so unpredictable. These aren't engineering delays, Mr. Hammond. They're problems with control of the animals.
You've had plenty of engineering delays, Hammond said. Don't blame it on the animals.
Yes, we have. In fact, it's all we could do to get the main attraction park drive working correctly, to get the CD-ROMs inside the cars to be controlled by the motion sensors. It's taken weeks of adjustment to get that working properly, and now the electric gear shifts of the car are acting up. The gear shifts!
Let's keep it in perspective, Hammond said. You get the engineering correct, and the animals will fall into place. After all, they're trainable.
From the beginning of this had been one of the core beliefs of the planners. The animals, however exotic, would fundamentally behave like animals in zoos anywhere. They would learn the regularities of their care, and they would respond.
Meanwhile, how's the computer?
Hammond said. He glanced at Dennis Nedry, who was working in a terminal in the corner of the room.
This damn computer has always been a headache.
We're getting there, Nedry said.
If you had done it right in the first place, Hammond began,
but Arnold put a restraining hand on his arm. Arnold knew there was no point in antagonizing Nedry while he was working. It's a large system, Arnold said. There are bound to be glitches. In fact, the bug list now ran to more than 130 items and included many odd aspects. For example, the animal feeding program reset itself every 12 hours, not every 24 hours, and would not record feedings on Sundays. As a result, the staff could not accurately measure how much the animals were eating. The security system, which controlled all the security card-operated door, cut out whenever main power was lost, and did not come back on with auxiliary power. The security program only ran with main power. The physical conservation program, intended to dim lights after 10 p.m., only worked on alternate days of the week. The automated fecal analysis, called autopoop, designed to check for parasites in the animal stools, invariably recorded all specimens of having the parasite Phagostomum venenosum, although none did. The program then automatically dispensed medication to the animal's food. If the handlers dumped the medicine out of the hoppers to prevent its being dispensed, the alarm sounded, which could not be turned off. And so it went. Page after page of errors. Then he had arrived. Dennis Nedry had been under the impression that he could make all the fixes himself over the weekend. He had paled when he saw the full listing. Now he was calling his office in Cambridge, telling his staff programs that they were going to have to cancel their weekend plans and work overtime until Monday. And he had told John Arnold that he would need to use every telephone link between Isla Nublar and the mainland just to transfer the program data back and forth to his programmers. While Nedry worked, Arnold punched up a new window in his own monitor. It allowed him to see what Nedry was doing in the corner console. Not that he didn't trust Nedry, but Arnold just liked to know what was going on. He looked at the graphics display on his right-hand console, which showed the progress of the electric land cruisers. They were following the river, just north of the aviary, and the ornithischian paddock. If you look to your left, said the voice, you will see the dome of the Jurassic Park aviary, which is not yet finished for visitors. Tim saw sunlight glinting off the aluminum struts in the distance, and directly below is our Mesozoic jungle river, where if you're lucky you may catch a glimpse of a very rare carnivore. Keep your eyes peeled, everyone. Inside the land cruiser, the screen showed a bird-like head topped with a flaming red crest. but everyone in Tim's car was looking out the windows. The car was driving along a high ridge, overlooking the fast-moving river below. The river was almost enclosed by a dense foliage of both sides. "There they are now," said the voice. "The animals you see are called Dilophosaurus." Despite what the recording said, Tim only saw one. The Dilophosaur crouched on its hind legs by the river drinking. It was built on the basic carnivore pattern, with a heavy tail, strong hind limbs, and a long neck. Its 10-foot-tall body was spotted yellow and black like a leopard. But it was the head that held Tim's attention. Two broad curving crests ran along the top of the head to the eyes to the nose. The crests met at the center, making a V shape above the dinosaur's head. The crest had red and black stripes, reminiscent of a parrot or a toucan. The animal gave a soft hooting cry like an owl. "They're pretty," Lex said. "Dilophosaurus," the tape said, "is one of the earliest carnivorous dinosaurs. Scientists thought the jaw muscles were too weak to kill prey and imagined they were primarily scavengers, but now we know they are poisonous." "Hey!" Tim grinned. "All right." Again the distinctive hooting call of the Dilophosaur drifted across the afternoon air towards them. Lex shifted uneasily in her seat. "Are they really poisonous, Mr. Regis?"
"Don't worry about it," Ed Regis said.
"But are they?"
"Well, yes, Lex.
Along with such living reptiles as Gila monsters and rattlesnakes, Dilophosaurus secretes a hemotoxin from glands in its mouth. Unconsciousness follows within minutes of a bite. The dinosaur will then finish the victim off at its leisure, making Dilophosaurus a beautiful but deadly addition to the animals you see here at Jurassic Park." The Land Cruiser turned a corner, leaving the river behind. Tim looked back, hoping for a last glimpse of the Dilophosaur. This was amazing. Poisonous dinosaurs. He wished he could stop the car, but everything was automatic. He bet Dr. Grant wanted to stop the car too. If you look on the bluff to your right, you'll see Les Gigantes, the site of our superb 3-star dining room. Chef Elaine Richard hails from the world-famous Le Baumer in France. Make your reservation by dialing 4 from your hotel rooms. Tim looked up on the bluff and saw nothing.
Not for a while, though," Ed Regis said. "The restaurant won't even start construction until November."
Continuing on our prehistoric safari, we come next to the herbivores of the Ornithischian group. If you look to your right, you can probably see them now. Tim saw two animals standing motionless in the shade of a large tree. Triceratops, the size and gray color of an elephant, with the truculent stance of a rhino. The horns above each eye curved 5 feet into the air, looking almost like inverted elephant tusks. A third rhino-like horn was located near the nose, and they had the beaky snout of a rhino. "Unlike other dinosaurs," the voice said, "Triceratops serratus can't see well. They're nearsighted, like the rhinos of today, and tend to be surprised by moving objects. They'd charge our car if they were close enough to see it. But relax, folks, we're safe enough here." Triceratops have a fan-shaped crest behind their heads. It is made of solid bone, and it's very strong. These animals weigh about 7 tons each. Despite their appearance, they're actually quite docile. They know their handlers, and they'll allow themselves to be petted. They particularly like to be scratched in the hindquarters. "Why don't they move?" Lex said. She rolled down her window. "Hey, stupid dinosaur! Move!"
"Don't bother the animals, Lex,"
Ed Regis said. "Why? It's stupid! They just sit there like a picture in a book," Lex said. The voice was saying, "Easygoing monsters from a bygone world stand in sharp contrast to what they will see next. The most famous predator in the history of the world. The mighty tyrant lizard known as Tyrannosaurus Rex." "Good, Tyrannosaurus Rex," Tim said. "I hope he's better than these bozos," Lex said, turning away from the Triceratops. The Land Cruiser rumbled forward. Big Rex. The mighty Tyrannosaurs arose late in the dinosaur history. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for 120 million years, but there were Tyrannosaurs for only the last 15 million years of that period. The Land Cruisers had stopped at the rise of a hill. They overlooked a forested area sloping down to the edge of the lagoon. The sun was falling to the west, sinking into a misty horizon. The whole landscape of Jurassic Park was bathed in soft light, with lengthening shadows. The surface of the lagoon rippled in pink crescents. Farther south they saw the graceful necks of the apatosaurs, standing at the water's edge, their bodies mirrored in the moving surface.
"It works, doesn't it?"
they heard Ed Regis say over the intercom.
"I like to come here sometimes in the evening and just sit."
Grant was unimpressed. "Where is T-Rex?"
"Good question. You often see the little one down in the lagoon. The lagoon's stocked, so we have fish in there. The little one has learned to catch the fish. Interesting how he does it. He doesn't use his hands, but he ducks his whole head under the water like a bird. The little one? The little T-Rex. He's a juvenile, 2 years old, about a third grown now. Stands about 8 feet high, weighs a ton and a half. The other one's a full-grown tyrannosaur, but I don't see him at the moment. Maybe he's down hunting the apatosaurs, Grant said. Regis laughed, his voice tinny over the radio. He would if he could, believe me. Sometimes he stands by the lagoon and stares at those animals and wiggles those little forearms of his in frustration, but T-Rex territory is completely enclosed with trenches and fences. They're disguised from view, but believe me, he can't go anywhere. Then, where is he? Hiding, Regis said. He's, little shy. Shy? Malcolm said. Tyrannosaurus Rex is shy? Well, he conceals himself as a general rule. You almost never see him out in the open, especially in daylight. Why is that? We think it's because he has sensitive skin and sunburns easily. Malcolm began to laugh. Grant sighed. You're destroying a lot of illusions. I don't think you'll be disappointed, Regis said. Just wait. They heard a soft bleeding sound. In the center of a field, a small cage rose up into the view. Lifted on hydraulics from underground, the cage bar slid down, and the goat remained tethered in the center of the field, bleeding plaintively. Any minute now, Regis said again. They stared out the window. Look at them, Hammond said, watching the control room monitor. Leaning out of the windows, so eager. They can't wait to see it. They have come for the danger. That's what I'm afraid of, Muldoon said. He twirled the keys on his finger and watched the land cruisers tensely. This is the first time that visitors had toured Jurassic Park, and Muldoon shared Arnold's apprehension. Robert Muldoon was a big man, 50 years old, with a steel-gray mustache and deep blue eyes. Raised in Kenya, he had spent most of his life as a guide for African big-game hunters, as his father before him. But since 1980, he had worked principally for conservation groups and zoo designers as the wildlife consultant. He had become well known in an article in the London Sunday Times that said, "What Robert Trent Jones is to golf courses, Robert Muldoon is to zoos, a designer of unsurpassed knowledge and skill." In 1986, he had done some work for the San Francisco company that was building a private wildlife park on the island of North America. Muldoon had laid out the boundaries for different animals, defining space and habitat requirements for lions, elephants, zebras, and hippos, identifying which animals could be kept together and which had to be separated. At the time, it had been a fairly routine job. He'd been more interested in an Indian park called Tiger World in southern Kashmir. Then a year later, he was offered a job as game warden of Jurassic Park. It coincided with a desire to leave Africa. The salary was excellent. Muldoon had taken it on for a year. He was astonished to discover the park was really a collection of genetically engineered prehistoric animals. It was, of course, interesting work, but during his years in Africa, Muldoon had developed an unblinking view of animals, as an unromantic view that frequently set him at odds with Jurassic Park management in California, particularly the little martinet standing beside him in the control room. In Muldoon's opinion, cloning dinosaurs in a laboratory was one thing, maintaining them in a wild was quite another. It was Muldoon's view that some dinosaurs were too dangerous to be kept in a park setting. In part, the danger existed because they still knew so little about the animals. For example, nobody even suspected the Dilophosaurs were poisonous until they were observed hunting indigenous rats on the island, biting rodents and then stepping back to wait for them to die. And even then, nobody suspected Dilophosaurs could spit until one of the handlers was almost blinded by spitting venom. After that, Hammond had agreed to study Dilophosaur venom, which was found to contain 7 different toxic enzymes. It was also discovered that the Dilophosaurs could spit a distance of 50 feet. Since this raised the possibility that a guest in a car might be blinded, management decided to remove the poison sacs. The vets tried twice on 2 different animals without success. No one knew where the poison was being secreted, and no one would ever know until an autopsy was performed on a Dilophosaur and management would not allow one to be killed. Muldoon worried even more about the velociraptors. They were instinctive hunters, and they never passed up prey. They killed even when they weren't hungry. They killed for the pleasure of killing. They were swift, strong runners and astonishing jumpers.
They had lethal claws on all 4 limbs. One swipe of a forearm would disembowel a man, spilling his guts out, and he had powerful tearing jaws that ripped flesh instead of biting it. They were far more intelligent than other dinosaurs. They seemed to be natural cage breakers. Every zoo expert knew that certain animals were especially likely to get free of their cages. Some, like monkeys and elephants, could undo cage doors. Others, like wild pigs, were unusually intelligent to lift gate fasteners with their snouts. But who would suspect that the giant armadillo was a notorious cage breaker? Or the moose? Yet a moose was almost as skillful with its snout as an elephant with its trunk. Moose were always getting free, and they had a talent for it. And so did velociraptors. Raptors were at least as intelligent as chimpanzees, and like chimpanzees, they had agile hands that enabled them to open doors and manipulate objects. They could escape with ease, and when, as Muldoon had feared, one of them finally escaped, it killed 2 construction workers and maimed a third before being recaptured. After that episode, the visitor lodge had been reworked with heavy barred gates, a high perimeter fence, and tempered glass windows, and the raptor holding pen was rebuilt with electronic sensors to warn of another impending escape. Muldoon wanted guns as well, and he wanted shoulder-mounted lawn missile launchers. Hunters knew how difficult it was to bring down a 4-ton African elephant, and some of the dinosaurs weighed 10 times as much. Management was horrified, insisting there'd be no guns anywhere on the island. When Muldoon threatened to quit and to take his story to the press, a compromise was reached. In the end, 2 specially built laser-guided missile launchers were kept in a locked room in the basement. Only Muldoon had the keys to the room. Those were the keys Muldoon was twirling now. "I'm going downstairs," he said. Arnold, watching the control screens, nodded. The 2 land cruisers sat on the top of the hill, waiting for the T-Rex to appear. "Hey," Dennis Nedry called from the far console. "As long as you're up, get me a Coke, okay?" Grant waited in the car, watching quietly. The bleating of the goat became louder, more insistent. The goat tugged frantically at its tether, racing back and forth. Over the radio, Grant heard Lex say in alarm, "What's going to happen to the goat? Is she going to eat the goat?" "I think so," someone said to her, and then Ellie turned the radio down. Then they smelled the odor. A garbage stench of putrefaction and decay that dried up in the hillside toward them. Grant whispered, "He's here." "She," Malcolm said. The goat was tethered in the center of the field. 30 yards to the nearest trees. The dinosaur must be somewhere among the trees, but for a moment, Grant could see nothing at all. Then he realized he was looking too low. The animal's head stood 20 feet above the ground, half concealed among the upper branches of the palm trees. Malcolm whispered, "Oh my God, she is as large as a bloody building." Grant stared at the enormous square head, 5 feet long, mottled reddish-brown with huge jaws and fangs. The Tyrannosaur's jaws worked once, opening and closing, but the huge animal did not emerge from hiding. Malcolm whispered, "How long will it wait?" "Maybe 3-4 minutes, maybe." The Tyrannosaur sprang silently forward, fully revealing her enormous body. In 4 bounding steps, she covered the distance to the goat, bent down, and bit it through the neck. The bleeding stopped. There was silence. Poised over her kill, the Tyrannosaur became suddenly hesitant. Her massive head turned on the muscular neck, looking in all directions. She stared fixedly at the land cruiser high above the hill. Malcolm whispered, "Can she see us?" "Oh, yes," Regis said on the intercom. "Let's see if she's going to eat here in front of us, or if she's going to drag the prey away." The Tyrannosaur bent down and sniffed the carcass of the goat. A bird chirped. Her head snapped up, alert, watchful. She looked back and forth, scanning in small, jerking shifts. "Like a bird," Ellie said. Still, the Tyrannosaur hesitated. "What is she afraid of?" Malcolm whispered. "Probably another Tyrannosaur," Grant whispered. "Big carnivores like lions and tigers often became cautious after a kill, behaving as if suddenly exposed. 19th century zoologists imagined an animal felt guilty for what they had done, but contemporary scientists documented the effort behind a kill, hours of patient stalking before the final lunge, as well as the frequency of failure. The idea of Nature, red in tooth and claw, was wrong. Most often the prey got away. When a carnivore finally brought down an animal, it was watchful for another predator, who might attack it and steal its prize. Thus this tyrannosaur was probably fearful of another tyrannosaur. The huge animal bent over the goat again. The great hind limb held the carcass in place, and the jaws began to tear at the flesh.
She's going to stay, Regis whispered. Excellent.
The tyrannosaur lifted her head again, ragged chunks of bleeding flesh in her jaws. She stared at the land cruiser. She began to chew. They heard the sickening crunch of bones. "Ew!" Lex said over the intercom. "That's disgusting!" And then, as if caution had finally gotten the better of her, the tyrannosaur lifted the remains of the goat in her jaws and carried them silently back among the trees.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tyrannosaurus Rex, the tape said.
The land cruiser started up and moved silently off through the foliage. Malcolm sat back in his seat.
Fantastic,
he said. Gennaro wiped his forehead. He looked pale. Control. Henry Wu came into the control room to find everyone sitting in the dark, listening to the voices on the radio.
Jesus, if an animal like that gets out,
Gennaro was saying, his voice tinny on the speaker,
there'd be no stopping it.
No stopping it, no. Huge, with no natural enemies.
My God, think of it.
In the control room, Hammond said,
Damn those people! They are so negative!
Wu said, "They're still going on about an animal escaping? I don't understand. They must have seen by now that we have everything under control. We've engineered the animals and engineered the resort." He shrugged. It was Wu's deepest perception that the park was fundamentally sound, as he believed his paleo DNA was fundamentally sound. Whatever problems might arise in the DNA were essentially point problems in the code, causing a specific problem in the phenotype, an enzyme that didn't switch on, or a protein that didn't fold. Whatever the difficulty, it was always solved with relatively minor adjustment in the next version. Similarly, he knew that Jurassic Park's problems were not fundamental problems. They were not control problems. Nothing as basic or as serious as the possibility of an animal escaping. Wu found it offensive to think that anyone would believe him capable of contributing to a system where such a thing could happen.
It's that Malcolm, Hammond said darkly. He's behind it all. He was against us from the start, you know. He's got this theory that complex systems can't be controlled and nature can't be imitated. But I don't know what his problem is. Hell, we're just making a zoo here. World's full of them, and they all work just fine. But he's going to prove his theory or die trying. I just hope he doesn't panic Gennaro into thinking to shut the park down.
Wu said, "Can he do that?"
No, Hammond said, but he can try. He can try and frighten the Japanese investors and get them to withdraw funds, or he can make a stink with the San Jose government. He can make trouble.
Arnold snubbed out his cigarette.
"Let's wait and see what happens," he said.
"We believe in the park. Let's see how it plays out." Muldoon got off the elevator, nodded to the ground floor guard, and went downstairs to the basement. He flicked on the lights. The basement was filled with 24 land cruisers, arranged in neat rows. These were the electric cars that would eventually form an endless loop, touring the park, returning to the visitor center. In the corner was a Jeep with a red stripe, one of 2 gasoline-powered vehicles. Harding the vet had taken the other that morning, which can go anywhere in the park, even among the animals. The Jeeps were painted with a diagonal red stripe because, for some reason, it discouraged the Triceratops from charging the car. Muldoon moved past the Jeep, toward the back. The steel door to the armaments room was unmarked. He unlocked it with his key, and swung the heavy door wide. Gun racks lined the interior. He pulled out a Randler shoulder launcher and a case of canisters. He tucked 2 gray rockets under his arm. After locking the door behind him, he put the gun into the back seat of the Jeep. As he left the garage, he heard the distant rumble of thunder.
"Looks like rain,"
Edry just said, glancing up at the sky. The land cruisers had stopped again, near the sauropod swamp. A large herd of apatosaurs was grazing at the edge of the lagoon, eating the leaves of the upper branches of the palm trees. In the same area were several duck-billed hadrosaurs, which, in comparison, looked much smaller. Of course, Tim knew the hadrosaurs weren't really small. It was only that the patasaurs are so much larger. Their tiny heads reach 50 feet into the air, extending out into their long necks. The big animals you see are commonly called Brontosaurus, the recording said. But they are actually a patasaurus. They weigh more than 30 tons. That means a single animal is as big as a whole herd of modern elephants. And you may notice that their preferred area alongside the lagoon is not swampy. Despite what the books say, Brontosaurs avoid swamps. They prefer dry land. Brontosaurus is the biggest dinosaur, Lex, Adrija said. Tim didn't bother to contradict him. Actually, Brachiosaurus was 3 times as large, and some people thought Ultrasaurus and Seismosaurus were even larger than Brachiosaurus. Seismosaurus might have had weighed 100 tons. Alongside the apatosaurs, the smaller hadrosaurs stood on their hind legs to get the foliage. They moved gracefully for such large creatures. Several infant hadrosaurs scampered around the adults, eating the leaves that dropped from the mouths of the larger animals. The dinosaurs of Jurassic Park don't breed, the recording said. The young animals you see were introduced a few months ago, already hatched, but the adults nurture them anyway. There was a rolling growl of thunder. The sky was darker, lower, and menacing. Yep, looks like rain, all right, Adrija said. The car started forward, and Tim looked back at the hadrosaurs. Suddenly, off to one side, he saw a pale yellow animal moving quickly. There were brownish stripes on its back. He recognized it instantly. Hey! He shouted. Stop the car! What is it? Adrija said. Quick! Stop the car! We move on now to see the last of our great prehistoric animals, the stegosaurs, the recording said. What's the matter, Tim? I saw one! I saw one in the field out there! Saw what? A raptor! In the field! The stegosaurs are a mid-Jurassic animal, evolving about 170 million years ago, the recording said. Several of these remarkable herbivores live here in Jurassic Park. Oh, I don't think so, Tim, Edward said. Not a raptor. I did! Stop the car! There was a babble on the intercom as the news was relayed to Grant and Malcolm. Tim says he saw a raptor. Where? Back at the field. Let's go back and look. We can't go back, Edward said. We can only go forward. The cars are programmed. We can't go back, Grant said. No, Regis said. Sorry, you see, it's kind of a ride. Tim, this is Professor Malcolm, said a voice cutting in on the intercom. I have just one question for you about this raptor. How old did you say it was? Older than the baby we saw today, Tim said, and younger than the big adults in the pen. The adults were 6 feet tall. This one was about half the size. That's fine, Malcolm said. I only saw it for a second, Tim said. I'm sure it wasn't a raptor, Edrija said. It couldn't possibly be a raptor. It must have been one of the Aussies. They're always jumping in their fences. We have a hell of a time with them. I know I saw a raptor, Tim said. I'm hungry, Lex said. She was starting to whine. In the control room, Arnold turned to Wu. What do you think the kid saw? I think it must have been an Aussie. Arnold nodded. We have trouble tracking Aussies because they spend so much time in the trees. The Aussies were an exception to the usual minute-to-minute control they maintained over the animals. The computers were constantly losing and picking up the Aussies as they went into the trees and then came down again. What burns me, Hammond said, is that we have made this wonderful park. This fantastic park, and our very first visitors are going through it like accountants. Just looking for problems. They aren't experiencing the wonder of it all. That's their problem, Arnold said. Can't make them experience wonder. The intercom clicked, and Arnold heard a voice drawl. John, this is the LP over at the dock. We haven't finished offloading, but if I'm looking at the storm pattern south of us, and then they're not being tied up yet, this truck gets any worse. Arnold turned to the monitor showing the cargo vessel, which was moored at the dock at the east side of the island. He pressed the radio button. How much left to do, Jim? Just the 3 final equipment containers. I haven't checked the manifest, but I assume you can get another 2 weeks for it. We're not well built here, you know. We live 100 miles offshore. You're requesting permission to leave? Yes, John. I want that equipment, Hammond said. That's equipment for the labs. We need it. Yes, Arnold said. But you didn't want to put money into a storm barrier to protect the pier, so we don't have a good harbor. If the storm gets worse, the ship will be pounded against the dock.
I've seen ships lost that way. Then you've got all the other expenses. Replacement of the vessel, plus salvage to clear your dock, and you can't use your dock until you do. Hammond gave a dismissing wave. Get them out of here! Permission to leave, Anby, Arnold said on the radio. See you in 2 weeks, the voice said. On the video monitor, they saw a crew on the decks, casting off the lines. Arnold turned back to the main console bank. He saw the land cruisers moving through the fields of steam. Where are they now? Hammond said. Looks like the south fields, Arnold said. The southern end of the island had more volcanic activity than the north. That means they should be almost at the Stegos. I'm sure they'll stop and see what Harding is doing. Stegosaur. As the land cruiser came to a stop, Ellie Sattler stared through the plumes of steam at the Stegosaurus. It was standing quietly, not moving. A jeep with a red stripe was parked alongside it. I have to admit, that's a funny-looking animal, Malcolm said. The Stegosaurus was 20 feet long, with a huge, bulky body and vertical armor plates along its back. The tail had dangerous-looking 3-foot spikes, but the neck tapered to an absurdly small head with a stupid gaze, like a very dumb horse. As they watched, a man walked around from behind the animal. That's our vet, Dr. Harding, Regis said over the radio. He's anesthetized the stego, which is why he's not moving. It's sick. Grant was already getting out of the car, hurrying toward the motionless stegosaur. Ellie got out and looked back as the second land cruiser pulled up and the 2 kids jumped out. What's it sick with? Tim said. They're not sure, Ellie said. The great leathery plates along the stegosaur's spine drooped slightly. It breathed slowly, laboriously, making a wet sound with each breath. Is it contagious? Lex said. They walked toward the tiny head of the animal, where Grant and the vet were on their knees, peering into the stegosaur's mouth. Lex wrinkled her nose. This thing sure is big, she said. And smelly. Yes, it is. Ellie had already noticed the stegosaur had a peculiar odor, like rotting fish. It reminded her of something she knew but couldn't quite place. In any case, she had never smelled the stegosaur before. Maybe this was its characteristic odor? But she had her doubts. Mostly herbivores did not have a strong smell, nor did their droppings. It was reserved for the meat-eaters to develop a real stink. Is that because it's sick? Lex asked. Maybe. And don't forget, the vet tranquilized it. Ellie, have a look at this tongue, Grant said. The dark purple tongue drooped limply from the animal's mouth. The vet shone a light on it, and you could see the very fine, silvery blisters. Microvesicles, Ellie said. Interesting. We had a difficult time with these stegos, the vet said. They're always getting sick. What are their symptoms? Ellie asked. She scratched the tongue with her fingernail. A clear liquid exuded from the broken blisters. Ugh! Lex said. Imbalanced disorientation, labored breathing, and massive diarrhea, Harding said. Seems to happen about once every 6 weeks or so. They feed continuously? Oh yes, Harding said. Animals this size has to take up a medium of 500 or 600 pounds of plant matter daily just to keep going. They're constant foragers. Then it's not likely to be poisoning from a plant, Ellie said. Constant browsers would be constantly sick if they were eating a toxic plant. Not every 6 weeks. Exactly, the vet said. May I? Ellie asked. She took the flashlight from the vet. You have pupillary effects from the tranquilizer? She said, shining the light in the stegosaur's eye. Yes, there's a meiotic effect. Pupils are constricted. But these pupils are dilated, she said. Harding looked. There was no question. The stegosaur's pupil was dilated. It did not contract when the light shone on it. I'll be damned, he said. That's a pharmacological effect. Yes. Ellie got back to her feet and looked around. What is the animal's range? About 5 miles. In this general area? She asked. They were in the open meadow, with scattered rocky outcrops and intermittent plumes of steam rising from the ground. It was late afternoon, and the sky was pink beneath the lowering gray clouds. The range is mostly north and east of here, Harding said. But when they get sick, they're usually somewhere around this particular area. It was an interesting puzzle, she thought. How to explain the periodicity of the poisoning? She pointed across the field. You see those low, delicate-looking bushes? West Indian lilac, Harding nodded. We know it's toxic. The animals don't eat it. You sure? Yes, we monitored them on video, and I've checked droppings just to be certain.
The stegos never eat the lilac bushes. Melia azerdarak, called Chinaberry or West Indian lilac, contain a number of toxic alkaloids. The Chinese use the plant as a fish poison. They don't eat it, the vet said. Interesting, Ellie said, because otherwise I would have said that this animal shows all the classic signs of melia toxicity. Stupor, blistering of the mucous membranes, and pupillary dilation. She set off toward the field to examine the plants more closely. Her body bent over the ground. You're right, she said. Plants are healthy. No signs of being eaten. Not at all. And there's a 6 weeks interval, the vet reminded her. The stegosaurs come here how often? About once a week, he said. Stegos make a slow loop through their home range territory, feeding as they go. They complete the loop in about a week. But they're only sick every 6 weeks. Correct, Harding said. This is boring, Lex said. Shh, Tim said. Dr. Sattler's trying to think. Unsuccessfully, Ellie said, walking farther out into the field. Behind her, she heard Lex saying, Anybody want to play a little pickle? Ellie stared at the ground. The field was rocky in many places. She could hear the sounds of the surf somewhere to the left. There were berries among the rocks. Perhaps the animals were just eating berries, but that didn't make sense. West Indian lilac berries were terribly bitter. Finding anything? Grant said, coming up to join her. Ellie sighed. Just rocks, she said. We must be near the beach because all of these rocks are smooth and they're in a funny little piles. Funny little piles? Grant said. All over, there's one pile right there, she pointed. As soon as she did, she realized what she was looking at. The rocks were worn, but had nothing to do with the ocean. These rocks were heaped in small piles, almost as if they had been thrown down that way. These were piles of gizzard stones. Many birds and crocodiles swallowed small stones, which collected in a muscular pouch in the digestive tract, called the gizzard. Squeezed by the muscles of the gizzard, the stones helped crush tough plant food before it reached the stomach, and thus aided in digestion. Some scientists thought dinosaurs also had gizzard stones. For one thing, dinosaur teeth were too small and too little worn to have been used for chewing food. It was presumed that dinosaurs swallowed their food whole and let the gizzard stones break down the plant fibers. And some skeletons have been found with an associated pile of small stones in the abdominal area, but had never been verified. And gizzard stones, Grant said. I think so, yes. They swallowed these stones, and after a few weeks the stones are worn smooth, and they regurgitate them, leaving this little pile, and swallow fresh stones. And then when they do, they swallow berries as well, and get sick. I'll be damned, Grant said. I'm sure you're right. He looked at the pile of stones, brushing through them with his hand, following the instinct of the paleontologist. Then he stopped. Ellie, he said, take a look at this. Put it there, babe, right in the old mitt, Lex cried, and Gennaro threw the ball to her. She threw it back so hard that his hand stung. Take it easy, I don't have a glove. You wimp, she said contemptuously. Annoyed, he fired the ball at her, and heard it smack in the leather. Now that's more like it, she said. Stayed by the dinosaur, Gennaro continued to play catch as he talked to Malcolm. So, how does this sick dinosaur fit into your theory? It's predicted, Malcolm said. Gennaro shook his head. Is anything not predicted by your theory? Look, Malcolm said. It's nothing to do with me, it's chaos theory. But I notice nobody's willing to listen to the consequences of the mathematics, because they imply very large consequences for human life, much larger than Heisenberg's principle of Gödel's theorem, which everybody rattles on about. Those are actually rather academic considerations, philosophical considerations, but chaos theory concerns everyday life. Do you know why computers were first built? No? Gennaro said. Bring it in there, Lex yelled. Computers were built in the late 1940s because mathematicians like John von Neumann thought that if you had a computer, a machine to handle a lot of variables simultaneously, you would be able to predict the weather. Weather would finally fall to human understanding, and men believed that dream for the next 40 years. They believed that prediction was just a function of keeping track of things. If you knew enough, you could predict anything. That's been a cherished scientific belief since Newton. And chaos theory throws it right out the window. It says that you can never predict a certain phenomena at all. You can never predict the weather for more than a few days anyway. All the money that has been spent on long-range forecasting, about $500 million in the last few decades, is money wasted. It's a fool's errand. It's pointless as trying to turn lead into gold. We look back at the alchemists and laugh at what they were trying to do, but future generations will laugh at us but the same way.
We've tried the impossible and spent a lot of money doing it. Because in fact, there are great categories of phenomena that are inherently unpredictable.
Chaos says that?
Yes, and it is astonishing how few people care to hear it, Malcolm said. It gave all this information to Hammond long before he broke ground on his place. You're going to engineer a bunch of prehistoric animals and set them on an island? Fine, a lovely dream. Charming, but it won't go as planned. It's inherently unpredictable, just as the weather is.
You told him this, Gennaro said.
Yes, I also told him whether deviations would occur. Obviously, the fitness of the animals to the environment was one area. This stegosaur is 100 million years old. It doesn't adapt to our world. The air is different. The solar radiation is different. The land is different. The insects are different. The sounds are different. The vegetation is different. Everything is different. The oxygen content is decreased. This poor animal is like a human being at 10,000 feet altitude. Listen to him wheezing. And the other areas? Broadly speaking, the ability of the park to control the spread of life forms, because the history of evolution is that life escapes all barriers. Life breaks free. Life expands to new territories, painfully, perhaps even dangerously, but life finds a way. Malcolm shook his head. I don't mean to be philosophical, but there it is.
Gennaro looked over. Ellie and Grant were across the field, waving their arms and shouting.
Did you get my Coke?
Dennis Nedry asked, as Muldoon came back into the control room. Muldoon didn't even bother to answer. He went directly to the monitor and looked at what was happening. Over the radio, he heard Harding's voice saying, "The Stego finally handle on now."
"What's that about?"
Muldoon said. "They're down the south point," Arnold said. "That's why they're breaking up a little. I'll switch them to another channel, but they found out what's wrong with the Stegos, eating some kind of berry."
Hammond nodded. "I knew we'd solve that sooner or later," he said.
"It's not very impressive," Gennaro said. He held the white fragment, no longer than a postage stamp, on his fingertip, into the fading light.
"You sure about this, Alan?"
"Absolutely sure," Grant said. "What gives it away is the patterning on the interior surface, the interior curve. Turn it over and you will notice a faint pattern of raised lines, making roughly triangular shapes."
"Yes, I see them."
"Well, I've dug out 2 eggs with patterns like that at my site in Montana."
"You're saying this is a piece of dinosaur eggshell?"
"Absolutely," Grant said. Harding shook his head. "These dinosaurs can't breed."
"Evidently they can,"
Gennaro said. "That must be a bird egg," Harding said. "We have literally dozens of species on the island." Grant shook his head. "Look at the curvature. The shell is almost flat. That's from a very big egg, and notice the thickness of the shell. Unless you have ostriches on this island, it's a dinosaur egg." "But they can't possibly breed," Harding insisted, "that all the animals are female." "All I know," Grant said, "is that this is a dinosaur egg."
Malcolm said, "Can you tell the species?"
"Yes," Grant said. "It's a velociraptor egg."
Control. "Absolutely absurd," Hammond said in the control room, listening to the report of the radio. "It must be a bird egg. That's all it can be."
The radio crackled. He heard Malcolm's voice.
"Let's do a little test, shall we? Ask Mr. Arnold to run one of his computer tallies." "Now?" "Yes, right now. I understand you can transmit it to the screen in Dr. Harding's car. Do that too, will you?"
"No problem," Arnold said. A moment later, the screen in the control room printed out. Total animals, 238. Species, Tyrannosaurus. Expected 2. Found 2. Version 4.1. Maiasaurs. Expected 21. Found 21. Version 3.3. Stegosaurs. Expected 4. Found 4. Version 3.9. Triceratops. Expected 8. Found 8. Version 3.1. Proconsognathids. Expected 49. Found 49. Version 3.9. Ophthanelia. Expected 16. Found 16. Version 3.1. Velociraptors. Expected 8. Found 8. Version 3.0. Apatosaurs. Expected 17. Found 17. Version 3.1. Hadrosaurs. Expected 11. Found 11. Version 3.1. Dilophosaurs. Expected 7. Found 7. Version 4.3. Pterosaurs. Expected 6. Found 6. Version 4.3. Hypsilophodontids. Expected 33. Found 33. Version 2.9. Euplocephalids, expected 16, found 16, version 4.0. Styracosaurs, expected 18, found 18, version 3.9. Microceratops, expected 22, found 22, version 4.1.
I hope you're satisfied, Hammond said. Are you receiving it down there on your screen?
We see it,
Malcolm said. Everything accounted for, as always. He couldn't keep the satisfaction out of his voice.
Now then, Malcolm said, can you have the computer search for a different number of animals?
Like what? Arnold said.
Try 239.
Just a minute, Arnold said, frowning. A moment later, the screen printed. Total animals, 239. Tyrannosaurs, expected 2, found 2, version 4.1. Myosaurs, expected 21, found 21, version 3.3. Stegosaurs, expected 4, found 4, version 3.9. Triceratops, expected 8, found 8, version 3.1. Proconsobanthids, expected 49, found 50, version question marks. Althinilia, expected 16, found 16, version 3.1. Velociraptors, expected 8, found 8, version 3.0. Apatosaurs, 17, found 17, version 3.1. Hadrosaurs, expected 11, found 11, version 3.1. Dilophosaurs, expected 7, found 7, version 4.3. Pterosaurs, expected 6, found 6, version 4.3. Hypsilophodontids, expected 33, found 33, version 2.9. Euplocephalids, expected 16, found 16, version 4.0. Styracosaurs, expected 18, found 18, version 3.9. Microceratops, expected 22, found 22, version 4.1. Total, expected 238, found 239. Hammond sat forward. What the hell is that?
We picked up another copy.
From where?
I don't know.
The radio crackled.
Now then, can you ask the computer to search for, let's say, 300 animals?
What's he talking about? Hammond said, his voice rising. 300 animals? What's he talking about?
Just a minute, Arnold said. That'll take a few minutes. He punched buttons on the screen. The first line of totals appeared. Total animals, 239.
I don't understand what he's driving at, Hammond said.
I'm afraid I do, Arnold said. He watched the screen. The numbers on the first line were clicking. Total animals, 244.
244? Hammond said. What's going on?
The computer is counting the animals in the park, Wu said. All the animals.
I thought that's what it always did, he spun. Nedry, have you screwed it up again?
No, Nedry said, looking up from his console. Computer allows the operator to enter an expected number of animals in order to make the counting process faster. But it's convenience, not a flaw.
He's right, Arnold said.
Just always used a base count of 238 because we assumed there couldn't be more. Total animals, 262.
Wait a minute, Hammond said. These animals can't breathe. The computer must be counting field mice or something.
I think so too, Arnold said. It's almost certainly an error in the visual tracking, but we'll know soon enough. Hammond turned to Wu.
They can't breed, can they?
No, Wu said. Total animals, 270. Where are they coming from? Arnold said. Damned if I know, Wu said. They watched the numbers climb. Total animals, 283. Over the radio, they heard Gennaro said,
Holy shit, how much more?
And they heard the girl say, I'm getting hungry. When are we going home? Pretty soon, Lex. On the screen, there was a flashing error message. Error. Search params. 300 animals not found.
An error, Hammond said, nodding. I thought so. I had a feeling all along there must be an error.
But a moment later, the screen printed. Total animals, 292. Tyrannosaurs, expected 2, found 2, version 4.1. Myosaurs, expected 21, found 22, version unknown. Stegosaurs, expected 4, found 4, version 3.9. Triceratops, expected 8, found 8, version 3.1. Proconsobanthids, expected 49, expected 65, version unknown. Ophnelia, expected 16, found 23, version unknown. Velociraptors, expected 8, found 37, version unknown. Apatosaurs, expected 17, found 17, version 3.1. Hadrosaurs, expected 11, found 11, version 3.1. Dilophosaurs, expected 7, found 7, version 4.3. Pterosaurs, expected 6, found 6, version 4.3. Hypsilophodontids, expected 33, found 34, version unknown. Euplocephalids, expected 16, found 16, version 4.0. Styracosaurs, expected 18, found 18, version 3.9. Microceratops, expected 22, found 22, version 4.1. Total, expected 238, found 292. The radio crackled.
Now you see the flaw in your procedures, Malcolm said. You only tracked the expected number of dinosaurs. You were worried about losing animals, and your procedures were designed to advise you instantly if you had less than the expected number. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was, you had more than the expected number.
Christ, Arnold said. There can't be more, Wu said. We know how many we released. There can't be more than that.
Afraid so, Henry, Malcolm said. They're breeding.
No.
Even if you don't accept Grant's eggshell, you can prove it with your own data. Take a look at the compy height graph. Arnold will pull it up for you. Notice anything about it?
Malcolm said. It's a Gaussian distribution, Wu said. Normal curve.
Yes, but you say you've introduced compies in 3 batches, at 6-month intervals.
Yes.
Then you should get a graph with peaks for each of the 3 separate batches that were introduced, Malcolm said, tapping the keyboard. Like this. But you didn't get this graph, Malcolm said. The graph you actually got is a graph of a breeding population. Your compies are breeding.
Wu shook his head. I don't see how.
They're breeding, and so are the Othnielia, the Myosols, the Hypsies, and the Velociraptors.
Christ, Muldoon said. There are raptors free in the park.
Well, it's not that bad, Hammond said, looking at the screen. We have increases in just 3 categories. Well, 5 categories, very small increases in 2 of them.
What are you talking about? Wu said loudly. Don't you know what this means?
Of course I know what this means, Henry, Hammond said. It means you're screwed up.
Absolutely not.
You've got breeding dinosaurs out there, Henry.
But they're all female, Wu said. It's impossible. There must be a mistake. And look at the numbers. A small increase in the big animals, the myosaurs and the hypsies, and big increases in the number of small animals. It just doesn't make any sense. It must be a mistake. The radio clicked.
Actually not, Grant said. I think these numbers confirm that breeding is taking place in 7 different sites around the island. Breeding sites. The sky was growing darker. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Grant and the others leaned in the doors of the jeep, staring at the screen on the dashboard. Breeding sites, Wu said over the radio. Nests, Grant said. Assuming the average clutch is 8 to 12 hatching eggs, these data would indicate that the compies have 2 nests. The raptors have 2 nests. The Othies have 1 nest, and the Hypsies and the Mayas have 1 nest each.
Where are these nests?
We'll have to find them, Grant said. Dinosaurs build their nests in secluded places.
But why are there so few big animals? We said. If there's a Maya nest and 8 to 12 eggs, there should be 8 to 12 new Mayas, not just 1.
That's right, Grant said. Except that the raptors and the compies that are loose in the park are probably eating the eggs of the bigger animals, and perhaps eating the newly hatched young as well.
But we've never seen that, Arnold said over the radio.
Raptors are nocturnal, he said. Is anyone watching the park at night?
There was a long silence.
I didn't think so, Grant said.
It still doesn't make sense, Wu said. You can't support 50 additional animals on a couple of nests of eggs.
No, Grant said. I assume that they are eating something else as well. Perhaps small rodents, mice, and rats.
There was another silence.
Let me guess, Grant said. When you first came to the island, you had a problem with rats, but as time passed, the problem faded away?
Yes, that's true.
And you never thought to investigate why?
Well, we just assumed, Arnold said.
Look, we said,
The fact remains, all the animals are female. They can't breed. Grant had been thinking about that. He had recently learned of an intriguing West German study that he suspected held the answer. When you made your dinosaur DNA, Grant said, you were working with fragmentary pieces, is that right? Yes, Wu said. In order to make a complete strand, were you ever required to include DNA fragments from other species? Occasionally, yes, Wu said. It's the only way to accomplish the job. Sometimes we include avian DNA from a variety of birds and sometimes reptilian DNA. Any amphibian DNA, specifically frog DNA? Possibly, I'll have to check. Check, Grant said. I think you'll find that holds the answer. Malcolm said, Frog DNA? Why frog DNA? Gennaro said impatiently, Listen, this is all very intriguing, but we're forgetting the main question. Have any animals gotten off the island? Grant said, We can't tell from these data. Then, how are we going to find out? There's only one way I know, Grant said. We'll have to find the individual dinosaur nests, inspect them, and count the remaining egg fragments. From that, we may be able to determine how many animals were originally hatched, and we can begin to assess whether any are missing. Malcolm said, Even so, you won't know if the missing animals are killed or dead from natural causes, or whether they've left the island. No, Grant said, but it's a start, and I think we can get more information from an intensive look at the population graphs. How are we going to find these nests? Actually, Grant said, I think the computer will be able to help us with that. Can we go back now? Lex said. I'm hungry. Yes. Let's go, Grant said, smiling at her. You've been very patient. You'll be able to eat in about 20 minutes, Edry just said, starting toward the two land cruisers. I'll stay for a while, Ellie said, and get photos of the stego with Dr. Harding's camera. Those vesicles in the mouth will have to be cleared up by tomorrow. I want to get back, Grant said. I'll go with the kids. I will too, Malcolm said. I think I'll stay, Gennaro said, and go back with Harding in his jeep, and with Dr. Sattler. Fine, let's go. They started walking. Malcolm said, Why exactly is our lawyer staying? Grant shrugged. I think it might have something to do with Dr. Sattler. Really? The shorts, you think? It's happened before, Grant said. When they came to the land cruisers, Tim said, I want to ride in the front this time with Dr. Grant. Malcolm said, Unfortunately, Dr. Grant and I need to talk. I'll just sit and listen. I won't say anything, Tim said. It's a private conversation, Malcolm said. Tell you what, Tim, Edry just said. Let them sit in the rear car by themselves. We'll sit in the front car. And then you can use the night vision goggles. Have you ever used night vision goggles, Tim? They're goggles with very sensitive CCDs and allow you to see in the dark. Neat, he said, and moved toward the first car. Hey, Lex said. I want to use it too. No, Tim said. No fair! No fair! You get to do everything, Timmy! Edry just watched them go and said to Grant, I can see what the ride back is going to be like. Grant and Malcolm climbed into the second car. A few raindrops spattered the windshield. Let's get going, Edry just said. I'm about ready for dinner, and I could do with a nice banana daiquiri. What do you say, folks? Daiquiri sound good? He pounded the metal panel of the car. See you back at camp, he said, and started running toward the first car and climbed aboard. A red light on the dashboard blinked. With a soft electric whir, the land cruiser started off. Driving back in the fading light, Malcolm seemed oddly subdued. Grant said, You must feel vindicated about your theory. As a matter of fact, I'm feeling a bit of dread. I suspect we are at a very dangerous point. Why? Intuition. Do mathematicians believe in intuition? Absolutely. Very important intuition, actually. I was thinking of fractals, Malcolm said. You know about fractals? Grant shook his head. Not really, no. Fractals are a kind of geometry associated with a man named Mandelbrot. Unlike ordinary Euclidean geometry that everybody learns in school, squares and cubes and spheres, fractal geometry appears to describe real objects in the natural world. Mountains and clouds are fractal shapes, so fractals are probably related to reality somehow. Well, Mandelbrot found a remarkable thing with his geometric tools. He found that things looked almost identical at different scales. At different scales? Grant said. For example, Malcolm said, a big mountain, seen from far away, has a certain rugged mountain shape.
If you can get closer and examine a small peak of the big mountain, it will have the same mountain shape. In fact, you can go all the way down to the scale to a tiny speck of rock. Seen under a microscope, it will have the same basic fractal shape as a big mountain.
I don't really see why this is worrying you, Grant said. He yawned. He smelled the sulfur fumes of the volcanic steam. They were coming now to the section of road that ran near the coastline, overlooking the beach and the ocean.
It's a way of looking at things, Malcolm said. Found a sameness from the smallest to the largest. And this sameness of scale also occurs for events.
Events?
Consider cotton prices, Malcolm said. There are good records of cotton prices going back more than 100 years. When you study fluctuations in cotton prices, you find that the graph of price fluctuations in the course of the day looks basically like the graph for a week, which looks basically like a graph for a year, or for 10 years, and that's how things are. A day is like a whole life. You start out doing one thing but end up doing something else. Plan to run an errand but never get there. And at the end of your life, your whole existence has the same haphazard quality, too. Your whole life has the same shape as a single day.
I guess that's one way of looking at things, Grant said.
No, Malcolm said. It's the only way to look at things. At least the only way that is true to reality. You see, the fractal idea of sameness carries within it an aspect of recursion, a kind of doubling back on itself, which means that events are unpredictable, that they can change suddenly and without warning.
Okay.
But we have soothed ourselves into imagining sudden change as something that happens outside the normal order of things. An accident, like a car crash, or beyond our control, like fatal illnesses. We do not conceive of sudden, radical, irrational changes built into the very fabric of existence. Yet it is. And chaos theory teaches us, Malcolm said, that straight linearity, which we have come to take for granted in everything from physics to friction, simply does not exist. Linearity is an artificial way of viewing the world. Real life isn't a series of interconnected events occurring one after the other like beads strung on a necklace. Life is actually a series of encounters in which one event may change those that follow in a wholly unpredictable, even devastating way.
Malcolm sat back in his seat, looking toward the other land cruisers a few yards ahead.
That's a deep truth about the structure of our universe. But for some reason, we insist on behaving as if it were not true.
At that moment, the cars jolted to a stop.
"What's happened?" Grant said. Up ahead, they saw the kids in the car, pointing towards the ocean. Offshore, beneath the lowering clouds, Grant saw the dark outline of the supply boat making its way back towards Punta Arenas.
"Why have we stopped?" Malcolm said.
Grant turned on the radio and heard the girl saying excitedly,
"Look, there! Timmy! You see it! It's there!"
Malcolm squinted at the boat.
"They talking about the boat?"
"Apparently." Edry just climbed out of the front car and came running back to the window. "I'm sorry," he said, "but the kids were all worked up. Do you have binoculars here?"
"For what?"
"The little girl says she sees something on the boat. Some kind of animal," Regis said. Grant grabbed the binoculars and rested his elbows on the window ledge of the Land Cruiser. He scanned the long shape of the supply ship. It was so dark it was almost a silhouette. As he watched, the ship's running lights came on, brilliant in the dark purple twilight. "Do you see anything?" Regis said. "No," Grant said. "They're low down," Lex said over the radio. "Look low down." Grant tilted the binoculars down, scanning the hull just above the waterline. The supply ship was broad-beamed, with a splash flange that ran the length of the ship. But it was quite dark now, and he could hardly make out the details. "No, nothing." "I can see them," Lex said impatiently. "Near the back! Look near the back!"
"How can she see anything in this light?" Malcolm said.
"Kids can see," Grant said. "They've got visual acuity we forgot we ever had." He swung the binoculars toward the stern, moving them slowly, and suddenly he saw the animals. They were playing, darting among the silhouetted stern structures. He could see them only briefly, but even in the fading light he could tell that they were upright animals, about 2 feet tall, standing with stiff balancing tails. "You see them now?" Lex said.
"I see them," he said.
"What are they?"
"They're raptors," Grant said. "At least 2, maybe more juveniles." Jesus, Edry just said. That boat's going to the mainland! Malcolm shrugged.
Don't get excited. Just call the control room and tell them to recall the boat.
Edry just reached in and grabbed the radio from the dashboard. They heard hissing, static, and clicks on the rapidly changing channels. There's something wrong with this one, he said. It's not working. He ran off to the first land cruiser. They saw him duck into it, then looked back at them. There's something wrong with both of the radios, he said. I can't read the control room. Then let's get going, Grant said. In the control room, Muldoon stood before the big windows that overlooked the park. At 7 o'clock, the quartz floodlights came on all over the island, turning the landscape into a glowing jewel stretching away to the south. This was his favorite moment of the day. He heard the crackle of static from the radios.
The land cruisers have started again, Arnold said. They're on the way home.
But why did they stop? Hammond said. And why can't we talk to them?
I don't know, Arnold said. Maybe they turned off the radios in the cars.
Probably the storm, Muldoon said. Interference from the storm? They'll be here in 20 minutes, Hammond said. You better call down and make sure the dining room is ready for them. Those kids are going to be hungry. Arnold picked up the phone and heard a steady, monotonous hiss.
What's this? What's going on?
Jesus, hang that up, Nedry said. You'll screw up the data stream. You've taken all the phone lines, even the internal ones? I've taken all the lines that communicate outside, Nedry said. But your internal line should still work. Arnold punched console buttons one after the other. He heard nothing but hissing on all 3 lines.
Looks like you got them all.
Sorry about that, Nedry said. Clear a couple for you at the end of the next transmission in about 15 minutes, he yawned. Looks like a long weekend for me. I guess I'll go get that Coke now. He picked up his shoulder bag and headed for the door. Don't touch my console, okay? The doors closed. What a slob, Hammond said.
Yeah, Arnold said, but I guess he knows what he's doing.
Along the side of the road, clouds of volcanic steam misted rainbows in the bright quartz lights. Grant said into the radio, How long does it take to the ship to reach the mainland? 18 hours, Edry just said. More or less, it's pretty reliable. He glanced at his watch. Should arrive around 11 tomorrow morning. Grant frowned. You still can't talk to the control room. Not so far. How about Harding? Can you reach him? No, I've tried. He may have had his radio turned off. Malcolm was shaking his head.
So we're the only ones who know about the animals on the ship?
I'm trying to raise somebody, Edry just said. I mean, Christ, we don't want those animals on the mainland. How long until we get back to base? Be here another 16, 17 minutes, Edry just said. At night, the whole road was illuminated by big floodlights. It felt to Grant as if they were driving through a bright green tunnel of leaves. Large raindrops spattered the windshield. Grant felt the land cruiser slow, then stop. Now what? Lux said, I don't want to stop. Why did we stop? And then suddenly, all the floodlights went out. The road was plunged into darkness. Lux said, Hey! Probably just a power outage or something, Edry just said. I'm sure the lights will be on in a minute. What the hell? Arnold said, staring at his monitors. What happened? Muldoon said. You lose power?
Yeah, but only power on the perimeter. Everything in this building's working fine, but outside in the park, the power is gone. Lights, TV cameras, everything.
His remote video monitors have gone black. What about the 2 land cruisers?
Stopped somewhere around the Tyrannosaur paddock.
Well, Muldoon said, let's call maintenance to get the power back on. Arnold picked up one of his phones and heard hissing. Nedry's computers talking to each other.
No phones. Damn Nedry. Nedry, where the hell is he?
Dennis Nedry pushed open the door marked fertilization. With the perimeter power out, all the security card locks were disarmed. Every door in the building opened with a touch. The problems with the security system were high on Jurassic Park's bug list. Nedry wondered if anybody ever imagined that it wasn't a bug. Nedry had programmed it that way. He had built it in a classic trapdoor. Few programmers of large computer systems could resist the temptation to leave themselves a secret entrance. Partly it was common sense. If inept users locked up the system and then called you for help, you always had a way to get in and repair the mess. And partly it was a kind of signature. Kilroy was here. And partly it was insurance for the future. Nedry was annoyed with the Jurassic Park project.
Late in the schedule, InGen had demanded extensive modifications to the system, but hadn't been willing to pay for them, arguing they should be included under the original contract. Lawsuits were threatened. Letters were written to Nedry's other clients, implying that Nedry was unreliable. It was blackmail, and in the end, Nedry had been forced to eat his own overages on Jurassic Park and to make the changes that Hammond wanted. But later, when he was approached by Lewis Dodgson at Biosyn, Nedry was ready to listen, and able to say that he could indeed get past Jurassic Park security. He can get into any room, any system, anywhere in the park, because he had programmed it that way, just in case. He entered the fertilization room. The lab was deserted, as he anticipated. All of the staff was at dinner. Nedry unzipped his shoulder bag and removed the can of Gillette shaving cream. He unscrewed the base and saw the interior was divided into a series of cylindrical slots. He pulled on a pair of heavy insulated gloves and opened the walk-in freezer marked Contents Viable Biological Maintain negative 10 degrees Celsius minimum. The freezer was the size of a small closet, with shelves from floor to ceiling. Most of the shelves contained reagents and liquids in plastic sacks. To one side he saw a smaller nitrogen cold box with a heavy ceramic door. He opened it, and a rack of small tubes slid out, in a column of white liquid nitrogen smoke. The embryos were arranged by species: Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, Hadrosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, each embryo in a thin glass container, wrapped in a silver foil, stoppered with polyolane. Nedry quickly took 2 of each, slipping them into the shaving cream can. Then he screwed the base of the can shut and twisted the top. There was a hiss of releasing gas inside, and the can frosted in his hands. Dodgson had said there was enough coolant to last 36 hours. More than enough time to get back to San Jose. Nedry left the freezer, returned to the main lab. He dropped the can back in his bag, zipped it shut. He went back into the hallway. The theft had taken less than 2 minutes. He could imagine the consternation upstairs in the control room as they began to realize what had happened. All their security codes were scrambled, and all their phone lines were jammed. Without his help, it would take hours to untangle the mess. But in just a few minutes, Nedry would be back in the control room, setting things right. And no one would ever suspect what he had done. Grinning, Dennis Nedry walked down to the ground floor, nodded to the guard, and continued downstairs to the basement. Passing the neat lines of electric Land Cruisers, he went to the gasoline-powered Jeep parked against the wall. He climbed into it, noticing some odd gray tubing on the passenger seat. It looked almost like a rocket launcher, he thought, as he turned the ignition key and started the Jeep. Nedry glanced at his watch. From here into the park, and then 3 minutes straight to the East Dock, 3 minutes from there and back to the control room. Piece of cake. Damn it! Arnold said, punching buttons on the console. It's all screwed up! Muldoon was standing at the windows, looking out the park. The lights had gone out all over the island, except in the immediate area around the main buildings. He saw a few staff personnel hurrying to get out of the rain, but no one seemed to realize anything was wrong. Muldoon looked over at the visitor lodge, where the lights burned brightly. Uh-oh, Arnold said. We have real trouble. What's that? Muldoon said. He turned away from the window so he didn't see the Jeep drive out of the underground garage and head east along the maintenance road into the park. That idiot Nedry turned off the security systems, Arnold said. The whole building's opened up. None of the doors are locked anymore. I'll notify the guards, Muldoon said. That's the least of it, Arnold said. When you turn off the security, you turn off all the peripheral fences as well. The fences, Muldoon said. The electrical fences, Arnold said. They're off, all over the island. You mean... That's right, Arnold said. The animals can get out now. Arnold lit a cigarette. Probably nothing will happen, but... You never know. Muldoon started toward the door. I better drive out and bring the people into those 2 Land Cruisers, he said, just in case. Muldoon quickly went downstairs to the garage. He wasn't really worried about the fences going down. Most of the dinosaurs had been in their paddocks for 9 months or more, and they had brushed up against the fences more than once, with notable results. Muldoon knew how quickly animals learn to avoid shock stimuli. You could train a laboratory pigeon with just 2 or 3 stimulation events, so it was unlikely the dinosaurs would know how to approach the fences. Muldoon was more concerned about what the people in the cars would do. He didn't want them getting out of the Land Cruisers, because once the power came back on, the cars would start moving again, whether the people were inside them or not. They might be left behind. Of course, in the rain it was unlikely that they would leave the cars, but still, you never knew. He reached the garage and hurried toward the Jeep. It was lucky, he thought, that he had the foresight to put the launcher in it. He could start right out and be in there and... It was gone. What the hell? Muldoon stared at the empty parking space, astonished. The Jeep was gone. What the hell was happening?